Welcome to episode 91 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back with Tim. We took a little break. I was at eTail West, so apologize for the lost week.
eTail is one of my favorite conferences. I feel kind of bad that I missed it. It's a really good bunch of people, have wonderful contacts there. I made a lot of business from eTail, so I encourage people to go to each version, eTail East and West, whenever they can. Pretty great. So let me give a couple shout outs, because this is part of our tradition in recent times. I reach out to people reach out to me. I say, what do you think of the podcast? Are you listening? Here are the folks that I heard from in the past week or so. Friend Harry Joyner, once again, he's a big e-commerce recruiter. He listens to our podcast. Thank you, Harry. It's always good to hear from folks like you. Heather Voigt, she works for an auction site. Katie Garcia works with her. Chris Timmis, who I believe Isaiah may know as well. He's in the investment world, works with a variety of tech people. Really great guy. Also, Steve Jordan, who works with a company called ClickSlate. Thank you to all of our listeners, and really reach out. I'm happy to give you a shout out and just say hello and thank you for listening. Now I'm going to pause just for a moment so we can insert our sponsor mentions, and then I'm going to throw it back to Isaiah, and I can't wait for today's episode. Hello, everyone. I'd like to give you a word from our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Balance. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Our next sponsor is TradeCentric. TradeCentric transforms the way businesses transact by enabling punch-out, purchase order, and invoice automation solutions for over 3,000 companies around the world. Uniquely positioned at the intersection of e-commerce and e-procurement, TradeCentric helps B2B buyers connect with suppliers and automate payment, procurement processes to drive greater efficiency and user adoption of streamlined systems. Learn more at tradecentric.com. Thank you to our sponsors. Everybody, I hope that was enough time for our crew to insert our mentions from our sponsors. Thank you to them. Isaiah, who do we have today as our special guest?
I'm excited to bring on, I'm going to try to get your last name right, but Tim Bucciarelli from
you nailed it.
From Iron Plane, somewhat local to us. I think you guys are you guys in Connecticut, or we're more in Boston.
Well, the CEOs in Portland, Maine. That's where the headquarters. Well,
okay.
We're 100% virtual, but that's where the business started. But I'm actually right next door to you. I'm in just outside of Boston.
Okay, yeah. So it's pretty distributed. So another local agency, and you guys have primarily focused on Magento, which, as we know, has also primarily become more and more a B2B focused platform. As I think we can talk more about that, how some of the other platforms have taken more market share in the B2C world, I think, at least from seeing the landscape over the last 11 years. So Tim, tell people about yourself and your background. I know you also have like a very long merchant background, so that's definitely something you want to get into.
Yeah, I came into the Magento world as a Magento merchant. Actually started with OS Commerce and Drupal as the foundation of our website for a specialty food retailer, shipping product all around the US. And we moved to Magento in 2014 maybe, and then upgraded to Magento 2 in 2018. And so
I
I've
call that the
lived,
heyday of Magento, the 2014, 2015, 2012 to 2015. I think it was really,
it was the go-to, and it
yeah,
was open source. It didn't have license fees,
yeah,
and you could find developers pretty easily.
yeah,
And so at that time, it was a really good option for a business that wasn't doing, tens of millions of dollars online.
yeah.
So then came Magento 2. That was
Mhm.
a hard pill to swallow for us as a merchant, but for many I know. And then about 3 years ago, I transitioned out of that world into agency world. So now I work with Ironplane, as you mentioned, where we service Magento and Adobe Commerce clients. We also are a big commerce partner, but that's a much, much smaller portion of our business. But we're very committed to that platform because we like the philosophy and we love the people.
Sure. Can you tell, is that newer or what? I think that you didn't start in, or Ironplay didn't start in BigCommerce. You guys picked that up recently?
No, we started in Magento, and we've lived in Magento for many, many years, probably 10 or 11 years now. But BigCommerce, we've started working with them probably a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what made you guys pick them up over Shopify?
We preferred their open SaaS approach. We still like to give merchants a little bit more of the flexibility that they need, rather than putting them into a box that's defined by the platform provider.
Sure.
And so
It was
BigCommerce
more in
is
line
still
with kind of like the Magento world, right? It was the closest thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah. Yep.
like almost like a step
Yeah, and
amount of complexity, right? Like less complexity, but closest, right?
yes.
That's how I would kind of
Yep.
describe it. Yeah, it's usually when I tell people, because a lot of people are looking at Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento. It's like Shopify is the easiest. It's great if you're in that box. BigCommerce kind of in the middle, and the Magento's usually most certainly the most complex, most enterprise of the three.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
But tell us a little bit about what, like, because I think you came from B2C, but you probably have just had to kind of learn B2B in this evolution, right? Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so my title is Director of Engagement, and we're relatively small agency, so that covers a lot of bases. So
you wear a lot of hats, like
yeah, exactly,
like
which I love.
titles kind of like are like a little I think meaningless in agencies to some degree, just because you end up having to do a lot of stuff, you know.
Mine is purposefully vague, so you don't know exactly what I'm doing. Like, okay, Director of Engagement, I get some idea, but it's marketing, sales, client success, and partnerships. So when I'm trying to market us and sell us, I have to understand our clients very, very well. We have existing B2B clients, and I've learned a ton over the years about their needs, but also just the research into the industries themselves. And I think it's still probably one of the most interesting areas for e-commerce to tap into and to provide real value.
Can you talk about the platform selection a bit? I know we both have our own opinions, and it seems like as much. I think that the problem is people think it's easy because it's been commoditized in the way that like some of these platforms present themselves. They're just buying this thing, but I think people kind of underestimate. It's like, well, you're buying something that you really want for like 5 years, and you really want to make sure you made the right decision on that thing.
Right. And there are big differences between the platforms, and there's big impacts to your business if you don't make the right choice. So, I know as agencies, we all do discoveries and we do research and just make sure that there's a good fit. But it's also, not what fits your business today, but what's going to fit your business, 6 years from now. And a component of the discovery is understanding the business, understanding very custom kind of operational functionality that needs to be supported online, whether it's sales, whether it's fulfillment, whatever it is. And then there's also just total cost of ownership, because I think there's an understanding out there in the world, like, Adobe Commerce, big, expensive, Shopify, SaaS, simple, inexpensive. But it's not so cut and dried. So it's really worth digging into doing a total cost of ownership analysis. It takes some time, collecting a fair bit of data, and it's never perfect, but at least it'll give you broad brushstrokes what you can expect.
Well, I think part of, again, to jump on what you were just saying here, part of what I've seen with clients I've talked to is that you have to get them in the conversation about what they're planning to do with the business. It's not just what they're doing with the business right now. What do you do you want to have a lot more products, a lot more services? How do you want to be approaching things? Are you going to be working in physical retail in addition to, X, Y, and Z? All of these things are things that they may know or they may have already discussed, but they're not necessarily talking about it openly when you're coming to them and saying, well, what do you need? Right. And, oh, you want to replace or you want to upgrade. So all those things have to come into play, I think.
Yeah. I think it's more complicated than people think, right? I mean, sometimes I find people get too caught up on the licensing costs. They're like, because it's like, Magento hosting is not that, like, you can get a cheaper Magento host than a Shopify Plus license, but it's like, you're going to spend way more on Magento upgrade development. So have you factored that in? I think people just don't understand that, right? Because they've never really been through the upgrades. And it's only once they've been through 2-3 upgrades, they're like, oh, this is why you go with SaaS. But if you're willing to get the value of the platform that the upgrades are worth it, then it makes sense, right? But you have to get value out of the platform to justify those upgrades. And so I think there's a big difference, like just open source versus SaaS. I don't think people even understand. Like, that's why I shit on WooCommerce, and I've kind of made that my thing. It just works. It's like a clickbaity thing. It's good for social media. But I built WooCommerce sites. I did it when I started at Trellis. I did every platform. I did OS Commerce. I did OpenCart. I did Magento. I did Drupal Commerce. I do Shopify BigCommerce. We're actually doing now officially Salesforce. I've done Suite Commerce. I probably did one of the nicest sites on Suite Commerce. It was Nightwear, by the way. I've done probably 30, 40 ecom platforms. The problem that people don't understand is WooCommerce, you can get a WP Engine account cheap. Like, yes, you can get a WordPress site cheaper, but when you factor in the plugins, the updates, and like the overhead of keeping it alive and making it not break, you're going to spend more than a SaaS license. If you need the customization ability that you can't do on SaaS, well, that's the other misconception is I think people are like, well, I can't do that on SaaS. It's like, well, have you actually tried, right? Like, have you actually analyzed that you can't do it with an expert like me or you, right? Because most of the time when they say that, it's like, no, we could do that. It's just, maybe it's an app, maybe it's some sort of, it's not like you can't customize the platforms. It's just, there's a limit. Like, we can't create new APIs, right? Like, I can't create like a new Shopify API, right? They need to do that, right? So there's like, it gets into these really technical nuances, right? And then, but the problem that I see is that no one wants to pay for discovery. They'll only pay for discovery once they're bought into the whole project, which is kind of the wrong way to think about it. It's like buying the whole house without doing the architecture first, kind of thing.
Discovery is everything. Discovery is everything.
Yeah, and I think what I really like about discovery is that it's our approach is we go in and we really try to dig into the business and try to kind of understand what the best platform is. And if it involves a total cost of ownership review, then we come out of it and we might say, look, Shopify Plus could totally suit your needs.
But do you do that for free, or is that part of your discovery?
No, we do. So we do a paid discovery.
See, but that's what we do, though, is requires so much technical analysis. Generally, it's hard to do it for free. But do you ever find that it's hard for people to commit to that without, like, they usually seem to be bought into something more than that? You know what I mean? Like, they're not, it's very rare that you'll find someone that's just like, oh, let's just do discovery, no strings attached. Like, they kind of want to, it's like they want to almost be sold on more before they commit on discovery. That's just from my experience.
We lose sales because of the paid discovery, I would say, but we do not back down from it. What we do is we allow them to take a portion of that discovery and use it as credit if they sign on for us to do the meeting.
Yeah.
Like, we're not discoveries aren't.
Well, either way, you have to do it. That's what I tell people. It's like, yeah, whether it's a credit or not, like it's part of the project budget. Like
That's right.
we can't not do it. Otherwise, if you don't do it, go try and see what happens. Especially if you're especially if you're mid-market above. To your point, like, you know, SMB can maybe get away on Shopify, right? Because it's so simple. But mid-market above, like if you don't do discovery, I'd be shocked if your project goes well.
And honestly,
shocked, right?
it weeds out the prospects who aren't willing to invest in their e-commerce.
Do you ever follow up with them like after, if they're like, oh no, like do you ever see where they go? Because I do that sometimes.
Yeah, sure. And most of the time they're still sitting on M2 2.1, you know. And they said that they were going to go to BigCommerce instead of Magento because they hated Magento. They can't afford
they wouldn't
the
pay
discovery.
You discovery. They didn't want to pay you for discovery.
Yeah, and so they just suffer through living on their existing.
You realize those people, and I think a lot of people don't realize that you're not PCI compliant. Like you're on a software that is not officially supported by the vendor, which means if you get a scan, the scan and like the compliance is going to say. So like the thing is, there's probably a shit ton of businesses out there on WooCommerce and Magento that are not PCI compliant because they don't even understand what they actually have signed up for.
It's risk tolerance.
Yeah.
You know, why would a hacker want to come after?
You can't be on unsupported software for like 4 years, you know?
Something that's happened in, you know, because I've had a relatively long career now and I like making a lot of jokes about it. But one of the things that's happened is I cycle through some clients multiple times. So there's a client I've worked for 3 times at this point, right? And so which is hilarious.
For different people, or like the people have changed.
Different people. They're all different people.
And you're like, you know, I've actually done this before. I know you're like.
Well, it's funny because one time they brought me in specifically because they said that they kind of lost the corporate memory because everybody who was leadership there left. And they knew I'd been involved in a project there, and they brought me back in to remind them. It's like, you know, but it's really weird. But the reason I brought that up is that you actually can cycle through, like, you know, all right, we'll do this for 3 years. And it's like, all right, I wouldn't recommend that, but okay. And then 3 years later, they come back and they say, guess what? You know, let's talk about what you said 3 years ago. It really is remarkable. So, you know, I never really like totally dump or diss on anybody live and in person. I'm saying, look, you really need to think about this. And if you say no, you have your reasons, but you're going to come back to me, or you're going to have to come back to somebody else at a later date and do all the things that we're talking about today. And it happens. I mean, that's what's remarkable in my career is that it actually takes place. 3 years pass. They say, okay, Tim, guess what? You know, and here we go.
Well, here's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant to your point, to both you guys, and hopefully you guys can add to
both
this. Yeah, I was like, oh man, this is I gotta remember how to address you guys. But this is for both of you. Like, so kind of to that point, prospect came to us, just like you're saying, but didn't move forward for whatever reason. They were on Magento, but this is like the heyday of Magento. So it kind of made sense, right? Like 2014, 2015, can't really fault someone for being on Magento when it's not a fit, because at the time, Shopify and BigCommerce, they weren't quite as mature. So it really kind of made sense. And they had some complexity, right? They were in a business that had some complexity, right? Then apparently, we weren't involved in this, they moved to WooCommerce. It's a crapshoot. They know it's a dumpster fire. They know it. They're trying to get off it. And we did a big sales process. Like sometimes we'll go pretty deep in the sales process pre-discovery if it's a bigger deal, right? And there's complexity. The proposal is pretty in depth. Yes, we still need to do discovery, but we went like almost like a chunk of free discovery, right? Got them a proposal. We felt BigCommerce was the right fit for them for that open SaaS reason, which is like they're not quite big enough for like a Magento. Well, obviously they left Magento for a good reason. They weren't ready for it sophistication wise, but they're a little too complex for Shopify. They need like custom checkout and things that are hard to do in Shopify, right? They go through this long process and they're like, yeah, we're ready to move forward. I got new people coming to the company and they're like, well, actually now we're going to Salesforce. Salesforce Commerce Cloud. And keep in mind, this business does like $3 million online. They have a lot of complexity, So that's why, like, generally a $3 million online business, I would try and move to Shopify because it's pretty low if it's like B2C, right? And simple. But there's enough complexity where, like, kind of like a large project for that size volume. But like, it's just the story that I'm getting at is I feel like what's going to happen, and if they do move, I don't know if they've officially moved forward. They've gone from a platform that they didn't like to another platform they didn't like to now, which I think will be way overkill and more expensive, and probably the most enterprise platform in the market above Magento in terms of enterprise options. And
Sure.
I was talking to someone who's in that space, and they said, like, the good agencies are charging $250 an hour.
Yeah.
And imagine what it costs to get anything done with the overhead and like the size of these agencies. So now you have a business that might go 3 different platforms in a row, in my opinion, on the wrong platform over the course of like 10 years.
And that's the scenario.
And that's why they're stuck at $3 million online, right? Like, that's why they're never going to get to 10 or 20,
They probably didn't do their total cost of ownership. I mean, you do that, you plug in the numbers for Salesforce Commerce Cloud, and you're gonna.
Well, the problem is, it's like someone that had worked probably on a business that worked for Salesforce in the past, or Salesforce will come down. Sometimes the companies will get really aggressive on the licenses. So the license seems cheap, but it's like they're not factoring in the other costs, and that's where I think people don't understand total cost of ownership. So why don't we get into that? How would you define total cost of ownership, especially with your merchant background? Because I think that's missing, right, from the understanding, right? They just look at the license cost,
Yeah, right. I mean, no, it's got to be support costs too. I mean, and so, for example, you've got the core out of the box, as they call it, the functionality, right? And you pay a license fee for that. And then you may need to add on some customization, maybe front end or back end, depends on what platform and what capacity you have to do that. And then you've got these extensions, modules, or apps, whichever platform you're on. Some of them will charge you one-time fees. Some of them will charge you an ongoing fee. Some of them can be quite expensive. And there's usually going to be some degree of support that you need. So you're going to probably have an agency partner. This is more applicable in the scenario of Magento, of course, than with Shopify or BigCommerce. But even there, you still might need an agency that you need to reach out to every time.
Or at least a developer, like some development resources, right? And whether that's a freelancer up to like a big agency, there's some variation there, but it's usually something, right? Yeah.
So I think all of those things add up. And, the license fee is easy to figure out. The support costs, you have to come up with a number of hours per month you expect to need. But
I think that's where people go wrong. They don't understand the real cost of that when it comes to a platform like Magento, or even like like these more enterprise platforms like Salesforce, where it's unlikely you're going to get someone good for like 10 hours a month, right? Like you're not going to find like a Salesforce Commerce Cloud freelancer. Like that's not, like, they don't really exist because they all work for giant agencies that can get Adidas, like.
Yeah, and the work that they're going to produce for you. I mean, that's as a merchant, that's what I went through. In fact, when the reason I came to Ironplane, I met them because they took over our website when it was absolute travesty. I mean, it was duct tape and bubble gum, and we couldn't get it launched because the developers were so incompetent. And we went out with RFP. We found a bunch of different companies to talk to. We chose Ironplane, and they fixed it. It was a Magento rescue, which I know that you guys know that term, but they helped us get the site into workable condition. But if you're paying a freelancer, and who knows what their skill sets are, but they're really cheap, but what's the quality of the code, and how's that going to behave, further down
how's
the
that
road?
going to scale? Yeah. But I think you can maybe get by on that on like a Shopify or BigCommerce if you're a simpler site.
For
right?
sure, definitely. I was thinking Salesforce and Magento.
Yeah, but if you're on Salesforce Commerce Cloud or Magento, the complexity is so high, you can't really afford to have like you need like a tech lead, code review. And that's where I think people just don't understand. There's like this overhead associated with like this process that ends up, generally we find at least 40 to 80 hours a month with these kind of more enterprise platforms, times 175, $200 an hour. You do the math, all of a sudden what they don't realize, you're spending $100 grand a year. Some of that's going to go to upgrades and maintenance. and you're not getting that many new features for that.
I mean, I try to bring this stuff up in plain language to people too, because we're all exactly on the same page on this. And I brought up scenarios where it's like, okay, if you buy a tuxedo, you're not going to throw it in the washing machine, right? And if you buy like this very fancy BMW or whatever car,
I think the car is like, if you go to get your paint fixed on like my friend had a special car, the paint was $8,000 to fix it because it's this random color, and that's what it's like when you go to these more.
It's exactly
what
it
is. Enterprise you go,
exactly
right? And people just don't get that. And I think it's also important to say who are their customers. Like Salesforce is doing a good job, but if you look at their customers, I was at ETL West. It's new old brands. They own Yankee Candle. They're a $10 billion company. It's so nice. Like these guys have 100 developers in-house or 1,000 developers. Like, you are not at that level, right? If you're doing $3 million online, right? You're competing for the attention of the agencies that service those people, right? It's just a whole different ball game. And Magento's somewhere in the middle, right? That's where it's kind of interesting, right? Because you have people that are very down market in Magento all the way up to the super enterprise with Adobe, right? But I think that's where you hit that weird middle ground, right? Should they be on it or should they be on BigCommerce? I mean, that's not easy. That's where I think people don't understand. That's not an obvious answer usually. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm like, what, like you're not using any of these features. It's obvious, right? But that's usually it's more complicated than that,
And as Shopify and BigCommerce continue to improve their technology and come out with new features and functionality, the margin between those platforms may get smaller and smaller.
It is. That's my bet. I mean, they're innovating. I think you're going to see that margin get so small that it's almost non-existent within 3 to 5 years, maybe even less. And we're seeing that happen already. I'm actually getting more B2B conversations with Shopify. They launched company accounts and price lists. Is it like full enterprise? Yeah. Is it? Sorry, with Shopify. Oh,
Shopify.
Shopify. B2B, like people are coming to me for B2B Shopify. We are having those conversations. They launched, but people don't know how to use it yet, right? Because people don't even know how the company accounts and the price list work. And a lot of these people have never even seen that concept before because they're coming from the D2C world, right? But it's happening, that world, and that's in the Shopify level. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's ready for like complex enterprise B2B distribution, multi-warehouse, crazy, there's some stuff we do in Magento that would be really hard to do in Shopify, right? Or maybe impossible, but that's in the last 6 months. So imagine in 2 years, who knows, right?
I think part of it is that, if a client, if Shopify clients decide that they want to also do B2B, right? Shopify makes this case and says, well, now guess what? We have X, right? Yeah. And so they don't lose clients to somebody else. And so even if it's that first step, it probably keeps a lot of clients happy
because of the right? I mean, they also they're moving up market into the enterprise. BigCommerce is doing the same thing. I mean, we're going to go through an interesting period here where we're definitely, we're in an economic crisis to some degree, whatever they say officially, like the economy is down. Like if you talk to people, most people aren't thriving like they were, before in some ways. Right. So, with that comes usually some hard choices and consolidate. I don't see all these because there's also a million other platforms that we're not talking about, right? Like do you think SuiteCommerce will be here in 5 years? Probably not. Like if you're NetSuite, why do you invest in SuiteCommerce when you can just
you got the bigger ones. You got Oracle, you've got SAP. I mean,
Oracle Commerce Cloud already is discontinued. Oracle shut down commerce. So Oracle shut down commerce. They have not shut down SuiteCommerce though. Because Oracle owns NetSuite.
Right. Yeah.
So they shut down Oracle. Like Oracle Commerce is no longer supported, right? Isn't that?
I knew that they had laid some people off. I wasn't sure that they had shut it down.
I will. Wow. Let me. This is where we Google. We're doing some more live Googling on the show now.
Let's ask ChatGPT. That's more.
Yeah. Let's do that. Oracle Commerce
I
Cloud.
figured I should have had the over under on whether
Yeah.
ChatGPT would be mentioned in this podcast.
That's the joke, of course. I feel like I have to
This
mention
is a
that or
good article.
Mid-Journey
The
or
larger the
Someone I know
software-
went to a conference recently and she was so fed up. She's like, every single presentation started with ChatGPT told me this. And she's like, okay, enough.
enough.
You guys see this? We'll do a little screen
I could
share
see it.
takeover. The
I could
larger
see
the software portfolio, the larger the chance of sunsetting, which is true, right?
Probably true.
Because they have too many products to focus on. A recent LinkedIn reported the sunset.
Oh, Andy Hoare. I know Andy. Yeah.
So it's gone. I'm pretty sure it's gone. Like they are not. I think people are on it. Like they're not saying like you're like they're not like shutting you off, right? But I think like it is no longer getting new features. Like they have stopped adding new features to it. When do they say that for SuiteCommerce, right? When does NetSuite, Oracle owns NetSuite, when they go, hey, we can just partner with Sligo and, you know, have BigCommerce do this, or maybe they buy BigCommerce. That's not out of the question.
That's an
Well, they have the money. If anybody has the money, it's somebody like that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we didn't talk about the other platforms, but you got SuiteCommerce, right? You have a platform called Unilog in B2B, small user base, but that's a small player. Optimizely is they bought Insight and they're kind of a smaller niche player, but they have a market share. WooCommerce, Kibo. I mean, how are these platforms gonna survive? Like, I mean, that's my question to the ecosystem.
They've all got their niche. They've all got their niche, and I think that they've.
But at what point is that niche even a viable offering that's interesting? Because
I think
the bar gets raised with the bigger platforms, you know.
I think the niche gets, like we said, the margin between them gets smaller and smaller. And part of the reason the margin gets smaller and smaller is because of education. Because you don't know what you don't know. You're on a platform and it's working for you and you're spending, $20,000 a month supporting it, but you have no clue what you could have instead.
Yeah, you don't know that you might be able to be somewhere where it can be
exactly. So education is going to be a big component of this. This is why I like conversations like this that are honestly trying to be as agnostic as possible, trying to sit in the merchant's
I try to make this podcast not Trellis, not Magento, not Shopify, not like I purposely not gotten those sponsors. I haven't even tried to, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's good for our listeners.
Balance is a B2B payments company, and they don't really have a bag in the race. They don't really have one horse in the race of the platforms because they just want B2B anyone to do. They have a lot of custom customers actually, which is interesting. A lot of their customers are custom marketplaces, B2B custom marketplaces. Very interesting. They talk about a niche. They've got a niche carved out there in B2B custom marketplaces.
I think that makes me think of Miracle.
Exactly. Yeah, but some of these people are just straight. It gets complex. You just build it yourself.
Well, a while ago, I don't think people do this anymore, but some of the platforms used to launch based on these platforms would launch based on the category in which they were in. It's like we do jewelry or we do supplements.
Well, you have Wine Direct, right? You still have Wine Direct.
Yeah,
they're still out there, but I see that kind of as a dying breed, right? Most likely.
I think so too. It's not at all what people really do, because as soon as you start doing something else or you realize the features and functions you want are elsewhere.
They can't keep up. They're not gonna be able to keep up with Shopify or BigCommerce and Magento features. And Shopify is aggressively going after wine because all they need is just a drinks app. There's a guy that has the drinks app, which is an app for wine compliance. So now you install the app and you're wine compliant and you have Wine Direct with Shopify. So yeah, I think those
a lot of those platforms came out of like an agency with a client in an industry with very specific needs. And there were no platforms that could satisfy those needs. So they built them a website, an e-commerce platform, and then they said, hey, there's a niche here. There's an industry here.
Yeah.
There's 500 other companies we could sell this to, and we're going to resell it. And they became what became the de facto auto part manufacturer, e-commerce.
Yeah, the auto parts site. Yeah, the furniture. Yeah.
And those platforms still exist today, and they still have such a strong client base. The challenge is that I think I do think they're dying a slow death, and that the people on those platforms may not know exactly where to go next.
Or they don't know that they're on a slowly sinking ship. It's like the boil of frog. They're slowly boiling on the software, but they don't know it because it's so slow. And then all of a sudden, Oracle says, by the way, it's over. And they get an email saying that their platform's not supported, or they're, I mean, another came up, Miva Merchant. I got a request for client on me. I was like, I'll help you with marketing, but I'm not going to learn Miva Merchant. Like, there's no business case for me to learn Miva Merchant. Like, can you tell me what it can do that BigCommerce can't do or Shopify can't do? Oh, you're SaaS? Okay, so is BigCommerce or Shopify. They have way more customers. Like, what can you do that they can't do? I mean, no one can give me that answer. Maybe they'll come on the podcast, but probably not after this episode, right? But
after listening to this,
yeah,
I think.
But you know, I'm betting on consolidation, right? Interest rates are up. The day of this like never-ending zombie unprofitable companies for 10, you know, the WeWorks. I saw WeWorks in distress. Silicon Valley Bank might be going under. The days.
I'm shocked.
Did you see that? Did you see that?
I did see it. I know. Just like,
so,
I am not shocked. That's my reaction.
A lot of these things are running unprofitably, right? Commerce tools, they got a valuation of 1.9 billion. I just saw the report that someone only have 200 customers. 200 customers. That, I mean, that's insane.
And 1.9 billion.
That means each customer is valued at, what is that? You know, 100 million or 10 million, something like that, right? If you do the math at the $1.9 billion value, they'll never be able to live back up to that.
No.
Yeah.
There will be a lot of consolidation. I mean, I think that this is another.
They're going to have to get bought by SAP for pennies on the dollar, probably Oracle. Maybe they'll be the new Oracle Commerce Cloud. Where is that going to go?
I mean, I'll just say something for the very old listeners who are out there. Remember when there used to be things called browser wars and stuff? You know, like there used to be like there are tons of choices. You know, and like now there are like 3 or whatever. Or 4.
Exactly. We're gonna go through we might title this episode the e-commerce, you know, consolidation reckoning, right? And I think the last standing platforms are probably going to be Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento. I mean, Magento just has such a big install base; it's not going to go anywhere. Salesforce will probably stay around just because they have a decent size enterprise sale. Honestly, outside of those 4, I don't know who's going to survive. I really don't.
So one of the things that, you know, obviously commerce tools kind of set their sights on and set their reputation on was headless and composable and mock alliance. And one of the things that I'm interested in is hearing your point of view on headless and specifically BigCommerce.
Did you see my recent post about I'll give you sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I literally posted. Feel free to comment on my post and
hello, listeners.
And give it some more engagement. I think this is my feeling. The platform's going to consolidate, and things that I think will just be default to the platforms. Shopify is Oxygen, Hydrogen. BigCommerce is deeply embedded right now with Vercel. I'm partnered with Vercel. I'm talking to Vercel. Next.js, that whole headless paradigm is in full steam ahead. Headless will just be a feature. It won't be a compelling reason to choose a platform in 2 years. So my argument is that if your platform's only compelling value is that it's headless, that is not that will no longer be a compelling value.
Well, but headless is different per platform. So for example, if we're talking headless and Shopify, which recently made some news about,
well, it doesn't have to be
composable. Yeah, but it's all within their box. It's not truly headless.
It's not really headless. I would argue that's not even really headless. Then people make this argument that there's the headless versus composable, and that that's Salesforce has something like that where you can live in that. I would just argue that that's just a new tech offering they have within their offering. If you really want to go headless, then you buy Vercel or you buy Netlify, and or you could go. I don't think you should go AWS. Like you buy Vercel or Netlify because they've already done it and they have a ton of money and they've built the infrastructure. You spin up React and Next.js, and I can do that within a day. And we wire up the back end through, some of these already have connectors. There's already a connector to BigCommerce and Contentful, and you could spin up the infrastructure in a couple of days. And now you have your front end as your front end, and you can do whatever you want with it. And your back end is whatever you want. And that's the whole point of headless.
But I guess my point is that some platforms enable you to choose more flexibility, the front end that you're plugging into it, than other platforms.
And I think that's smart. I think those are the ones that are going to have a better time with headless.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And that's why I think BigCommerce has
but that because that is headless. Otherwise, you're not really doing headless. You're just buying a slightly more modern front end for your existing platform.
Exactly. And it might be decoupled.
That's why I hate the idea of the two words. I think we should get rid of the two words, make it one word, composable, headless, merge them into one. Headless, composable. It needs to be one word, and it only means if you're fully extracted. If it's all in the same thing, then it's not really headless in my mind. Because then what are you doing? You're just cool. Yeah, your front end is React, but it's all in the same package then, and you can't extract the back end into other things. Then what's the point? You're just paying more for a slightly faster front end, I guess, kind of, with more complexity.
Well, while people argue about all this terminology, I'm working on Web 4 and Web 5. Web 3 is already over.
By the way, me and Tim, we partnered as part of our podcast proceeds to build Web 5 and Web 7, and
we're just gonna keep going.
We've got an initial coin offering. We've got an ICO coming out pretty soon.
Web 3 is already over, folks. It's already over.
Give us a bunch of money, and we'll put it in the Cayman Islands. Nothing bad can happen, I promise.
And you'll be valued at $2.9 billion.
You give us $10 billion, like nothing bad will happen. I promise.
If people would like to join the Web 5 Alliance, please contact us.
Yeah, the Tim Squared Isaiah Alliance, right? We'll call it the.
Oh my god!
So I don't know, Tim. I mean, I'm kind of like. But I think we're kind of on the same page here, is that we feel like these kind of like headless within the platforms aren't really headless, because you're just it's kind of like, okay, Shopify launched Shopify 2.0, the theme editor, and that kind of like, you kind of have to migrate off of 1.0. You could argue that their headless thing, if they're putting you in that box, is kind of just Shopify 3.0. But if you really want to go headless, in my mind, you have to be able to bring in other backends. You have to be able, you have a front end that can allow you to, you could have Magento, you could have Salsify, you could have whatever you want. You could have your ERP, you could have, 20 different things running in the back, APIs in the background systems. And then, whatever lives in those the whole concept of composable is the value there, right?
One of the ideas behind it anyway, or one of the value adds in theory, I don't know in practice, but is that, if you did have to re-platform your e-commerce engine, it's not quite as challenging a re-platform if you are headless. If you have a front end that can plug into multiple different e-commerce engines, in theory, you can at least maintain that.
Yeah, I'll give you the example. I'm rebuilding my site. My site's headless. It's on Vercel, and the backend is WordPress because I'm too lazy to change it to Contentful. And honestly, it's a cost thing, right? I've been on WordPress forever, and I just don't want to deal with that. Would be it would be actually bigger project than the other things I'm doing. I'm rebuilding some of the sections in the front end, so I'm doing a little bit of a front end branding re-experience, but I'm actually migrating a little commerce store that I have as a subdomain into the back end. So I'm bringing over a different commerce backend. I'm bringing over a subscription tool called Chargebee, and I'm bringing in new backend tools into the infrastructure because I don't want to use WooCommerce, it sucks. And using different tools in the backend. I don't have to re-platform. The front end is the headless. It's for sale. I'm changing some of the branding and the content. Hopefully that'll be live, and maybe when this episode goes live. actually, another example is we changed our ATS, which for those that don't know, is applicant tracking software. When we changed it, all I had to do was go and change the back end. I didn't have to change the front end. I just wired up the APIs. I think we were kind of lazy here, and it just goes to rippling because we couldn't make this live within. There's a more complex way to do it, basically. But like, if I change this to something else, I can have this content live here.
By the way, I see Jared is in the chat, right?
Oh yeah,
Jared.
Hey, you suck, Jared. No, but another example is I'm most definitely going to be changing my events platform. So my events platform, this data, I had to pull it out of the other events platform because it was causing issues and they didn't have good APIs, and I'm not happy with it. So I will likely be moving my events content to another events platform that can have good APIs. I haven't done the search yet, but I'm sure there's an events platform out there that has good APIs that I can bring in to run that content. And I don't have to do anything. It'll take me, it took my developers a couple hours probably to wire up that.
Yeah,
So
Eventbrite may be able to do that.
Yeah, I got to check Eventbrite, but the events platform's APIs really suck so far from my experience. So, hey, events guys, hire me. I'll fix your APIs, or I don't know.
There's a pitch. That's good.
It's probably why their stocks, like, I don't know. I don't think these companies are doing very well. So,
events kind of took a nosedive.
Yeah, well, then you had like the surge with online events, and then that's probably cratered. So then they tried to go hybrid, and you have this weird mix, and everyone, I don't know. I think they just don't have an identity, and one thing I know is that the ones we've tried, their APIs suck. So, but I also haven't put very much effort into it. But yeah, to that point, does that make sense? Yeah, like in practice, I'm doing it right now, which is I'm able to bring in things. I made my site headless because I knew that there's going to be a commerce component. I'm going to have a Trellis store for our swag. People always ask me how I can get our North Faces and our water bottles, and I have a Shopify site for a different brand that we've split off, but we want to bring it in within the same domain. It's better for SEO. It's easier to manage within one domain, but I don't want to run it on WooCommerce.
Yeah, so that was the promise, and I think as you demonstrated, I mean, it can have some benefit and flexibility. So for B2B businesses, I think especially, for us, when we talk to B2B businesses, the first thing is, what are their needs in terms of digital kind of transformation, and then how willing are they to invest in it? Because for so many B2B businesses, the core of their business is not online. And it never has been.
It's phone, it's email, it's in person.
It's very difficult for them to transition and to really see that opportunity and to take the money necessary to make that investment.
Well, a lot of what this podcast has been about is change management. What do you think their general needs are? I know it's hard to put everyone in a box and everyone's different, but what are some common themes you're saying within B2B that?
Well, one of them is going to have to do with channel conflict. I think that as a manufacturer, you have a question. Are we going to go direct to consumer? And many of them have never considered that before.
I think they
sell
should.
to retailers.
I think that if you're scared to do it, eventually you're going to be too late, and you're going to be GM and Ford, and Tesla's going to kick your ass.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's the
that's
question.
My opinion, but I'm just telling you what I think. But
yeah. I that's just one of the questions that they have, the other is, what really for me, like it's funny because when I was talking to B2B businesses and I was saying, well, what about e-commerce? They're like, no, we're B2B. We don't do e-commerce. That's because they have a vision of an individual with a credit card buying a widget on Amazon, and that's e-commerce. And so I started calling it sales enablement because there's no threat to your sales team. Your sales team is still absolutely required, but it's giving them the tools.
Yeah. Do they really want to be on the
24/7
phone for every $1,000 order? Like, your sales rep should be massaging the $10,000 orders and the $100,000 orders and guiding their customers to rebuy the parts and the things that might be the $500 AOV.
I mean, as we've talked about in other episodes with a lot of other folks, I mean, it really, I think the trend is to incentivize sales teams to drive sales through e-commerce, and to compensate them. We're compensating them for doing that because it's good for the business, and it's good for the salespeople, and it's good for the customers. So there's no downside to that. I think there's only fear that they're losing something by having things more automated when actually they're gaining time, and as Isaiah said, gaining the ability to work on those bigger, more complex sales that really often require a person in the middle of it, instead of repeat orders and all that kind of stuff, which you can just automate and off you go.
Yeah. So okay, channel conflict, sales enablement. What's number 3? There's always a 3.
There's always a 3.
1 and 2. I agree. I mean, but I think the channel conflict is such a bad excuse. I think it's, and I see that still. It used to be, when I started this business in 2012, it was like just insane how much objection we got on channel conflict. It's the barriers going down, right? Like, because do you want to be the last manufacturer to go direct to consumer? Probably not. And most major manufacturers have some aspect of D2C, and they've had it for a while now, right? And direct to business, right? Maybe they sell to businesses. Maybe they have a more direct to business instead of direct to distributor to business, right? So I think the channel conflict is a bad excuse. I think that companies need to get over it. They need to get that. That's just, it's not going to cut it in 2025 or 2027 or 2030. If you're not doing anything now, that means you're probably going to have nothing in 2025. You know what I mean?
I think it might be an initial knee-jerk reaction out of fear, and
it's a fear reaction. No business is successful operating in fear.
It can be right. It can be overcome, but it definitely requires thought and interacting with the people that you're worried about impacting. And but any business should be doing that anyway. But
they could create a separate brand, right? They could create a separate brand. There's so many ways to overcome it, right? Anyways, go ahead.
Instead of just one more idea, I'll give you 2 more ideas. One is oftentimes B2B businesses will say, I can't sell online because my products are too customized, too complex. And my point is, well, do you have all the data in your databases, your product databases, of all the configurations that you could have for your salespeople to build those custom orders? Well, yes, we have that data. Well, what's the level of effort required to put that into a tool online, allowing people to do that themselves?
Like a basic configurator, right?
Yeah. So that's
one. Checkout, even if it was just select your options and just look at it.
And honestly, some just are super complex, and that's when you're looking for lead generation, quote requests rather than actual purchases.
But that's the thing, is B2B commerce could be quote requests, and actually Magento has a quote request feature. You come back with a quote and they can buy that quote online, and people don't realize it's like that is a viable B2B e-commerce offering.
Same with BigCommerce with Quote Ninja.
Sorry. So complexity of products and quoting, we can kind of tie that into quoting, right? Because I think sometimes they're better off making it a quote than even trying to make it transactionable. Sales enablement, because I think that ties back, going back to the sales enablement really is just fear of losing your salespeople. That's what I think it is. I think they're scared to go into this because they're scared they're going to lose. They don't know how to deal with their salespeople.
And their salespeople will need to learn new tricks. For sure. They need to interact with video calls. They need to interact with chat. They need to interact with, like they know email, but I mean, anyway, there are definitely new skills to be adopted, and helping your salespeople acquire those skills is going to be essential.
All right. So the last one, I'll say, 4.
So the last one is prices. I think some people will say, look, our items cost $250,000 per unit. When would anyone purchase a $250,000 unit online? And the answer is, I think something McKinsey said, I just looked at a recent study, 35% of B2B buyers today are willing to spend $500,000 or more online.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and I can
So the
verify.
answer is 36% of your customers, or maybe.
But
actually,
then you go down to
50,000,
50,000, and it's like 74% of the buyers are willing to spend that online.
which is probably 98% of most of these businesses' orders.
Yeah.
Meaning 98% of your B2B orders, the customer is willing and probably happy to buy online if you make it good for them. You know? And they'll probably buy more because you can do AI and recommendations based on what they bought, not worrying about a sales rep, not knowing, like no human can do that. You know, especially if you have 100,000 product catalog or even 1,000 product catalog, you know?
Yeah.
So what about pricing? The other conflict I get, because pricing is a big one, but not just the pricing of the products and the size of the value of the order, but pricing per company. Like, oh, we have special pricing per company, and then it's in the ERP, and there's technical ways.
That's table stakes these days. That's table stakes. That, like, I mean, BigCommerce does that. Shopify does that.
Well, what I find is that people don't want to maintain it in two places, because now you have to maintain it in the ERP and the e-com platform.
Oh, well, with Magento, we just connect to the ERP.
But then you have to sync their price list per company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of an it could be a little bit of an integration nightmare. But you're right. Like it's something that can be overcome. It's just it's something that might require integration or maybe they simplify, right? If you do customer groups, it's pretty simple, right? I think it's when you have price list per company account where it's a lot of data, because you might have 1,000 companies and each one has its own price
and this, Tim, to your point about go to tiered pricing, like, but then you're a little bit at risk of like letting the technology drive your business practices. Like if you've been working this way for 20, 30 years, but the new technology demands simpler pricing, like, are you going to adjust your pricing to accommodate that technology?
I'll give you the answer to that. The answer to that is that the clients actually prefer tiered pricing because they prefer to know that they're being treated fairly, and that if they're an enormous company working with an enormous company, they don't have to fight for 1% cheaper deal.
And they also know how to get to the next tier. One of the best B2B sites I saw ever, I'm not going to name it because it's kind of like probably specific to their, they had a like almost like a rewards program, a B2B rewards program, where it showed you where you were in the tier, and it's like bronze, silver, gold, platinum. And the more you spend, the more your bar progressed towards the next tier.
It's part of the transparency
feature that they had built, but I think it was a genius custom feature.
It really is a transparency thing. I mean, and again, this is all, there's data about this. So I'm just going to assure everybody out there that you can start digging, and there's tons of data on this at this point, but it really is about the type of transparency that customers and clients are looking for at this point. They want to know that they're being treated well, they're being treated fairly, what they're getting, where it comes from, who made it, everything. And the pricing in a tier structure really, reflects all of that. It's part of the package. Otherwise, you're thinking that you're paying somebody behind the scenes, like classical movies of a salesperson in a bar, and nobody does that anymore. Nobody wants that anymore. They really don't.
Well, I would say a lot of people do it. When you say nobody does that, I think a lot of people do.
It's less all the time.
B2B hidden pricing. Because I've been talking to companies in building materials, it's all like that. In building materials, in construction, I can't get some of these companies to adopt online because they say that they can't get their, I don't know, it's a weird.
Well, I'll just give one last thing on this, because I'm in New York, right? And in New York, there's talk about having legislation to make things more fair in the way that salaries are transparent, right? And now, like you have to put and pricing has to be transparent for B2B and B2C. It has to be transparent for B2C already, by the way. But the B2B always had these, secret, mysterious things happening, whatever.
Pricing,
And now that people are saying, no, that's not going to happen. So if it really gets to that point, I think companies should just get ahead of this. You're not going to lose money, I think, by being more honest. You're going to get more volume. You're going to get more new people coming in who want to work with you,
Yeah, and it can end up being a little bit of a shell game too, I think. Like, I'm thinking about car dealerships. And, do you like to go into a car dealership and negotiate a deal on a car? No, nobody likes that experience. Nobody. I mean, yeah, you're excited about the car.
Maybe if you're Jared on our team, he's a sales guy, so he's like the one guy that I could see enjoying it.
Most people see, the thing is that most
but then
people
you compare it to like the Tesla app, or just going to the website and just literally
it's so easy. It's
just
so
purchasing
easy.
it on their website. Like there's a fairness there. There's an equitability.
You're getting the price
except for them lowering their price and then increasing their price and lowering their
Yeah,
price.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, that's like
But I
saying
think,
you bought your house at the wrong time. The reality is
right.
you bought your car when the supply chain was crap. You should have waited a year. Sorry.
So I guess generally I'm agreeing with Tim. I think
Yeah.
that is that's the right way to go, and I think it's the likely way that will land.
over time, I mean, nothing happens in an instant, nothing. But I've worked with companies that have gone through this process, big B2B companies, and they are living proof. They didn't lose business, they gained business. They made their current clients happy. It worked.
I think B2B businesses could also try this out. They could build a pilot program on the website and just start testing the tiered pricing out on certain customers or whatever, that the people that buy online get tiered pricing, and maybe you make it fairly competitive, and see how it works. Maybe it's less overhead. All of a sudden you're like,
all new customers.
Yeah.
You could just say all new customers.
All of a sudden you have way less overhead because you don't have to maintain 1,000 price books. Like, what's the cost of maintaining 100,000 price books? 2 employees, 3, if you add it all up and try, it's probably a lot when you like all the unintended consequences. It's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to maintain it, because it probably impacts so much of their operations. You know what I mean? So leave it with that. There's your let's leave people with that. How much does it?
Yeah, I was going to leave people with that and then circle back to Tim one more time and just say, we're going to wrap up the podcast, and we want to give you any last words. How can people reach you? Let us know.
So you can always find me on our website, ironplane.com/Tim. Actually, just a little page. But LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I commented on Isaiah's most recent post about big commerce and the future of e-commerce. Just try to be there in the industry a little bit more. Yeah, and if you're in the Boston area, then ping me on LinkedIn and grab a cup of coffee.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for today. It's been really great.
Thanks, Sam.